Hey guys, what's going on? This is Brendan Vermeyer, the founder and owner of Metabolic Solutions LLC. So, for those of you tuning in for the first time, I'm a functional health practitioner, mentor, and clinical advisor, on top of being a master nutrition coach and personal trainer. So, I'm very excited for this fun presentation that I've prepared. I've wanted to do this presentation for a little while and finally made some time to get it all put together. So, we'll dive in here. Essentially, if you are looking to lose fat or you're struggling to lose weight, lose fat, and you feel like kind of no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to lose the weight that you want, this is the right presentation to tune into because we're going to dive deep into looking at busting through those plateaus and digging into a lot of the science behind why your body might be not cooperating with you. So, without further ado, let's just go and jump in, have some fun here. So, for those of you that tuned into my last webinar, or maybe have seen my functional weight loss program video, I did borrow a few slides from that presentation. Now, certainly, I do think it's worth reiterating. So, we're going to look at a few of those again. But first and foremost, if this is you, if this describes you, you're one of those people that you've lost weight only to regain it all and maybe then some, or you kind of have taken that typical crash diet approach, or maybe you've been through that before and now you're taking a more educated approach and working with a trainer, nutrition coach or something, and being more mindful of your food choices, working on the quality, working on improving your lifestyle, your sleep, your activity. But if you're still struggling with nagging symptoms or you're not losing the weight that you think you should, aka what I always like to say, you don't feel that the results are what your efforts should yield, right? You're doing kind of all the right things, so to speak, and yet you don't seem to be getting anywhere. So obviously, I'm not going to read each slide. You guys can read it here, but this is the kind of stuff we're looking for. So I would say with my private practice, about 50% of the clients I work with are people that are kind of chronically ill, and these are people that conventional medicine didn't have answers for, or maybe not the answers that were as fulfilling and helpful as maybe they would have liked. I work with a lot of kind of complex cases like that, a lot of autoimmune conditions or kind of complex health disorders. And then I would say the other 50% of the clients I work with are a lot of people that are, the ones that are wanting to lose weight, which, that's the most common goal that most Americans have is wanting to lose weight. And then if you kind of further question them, they do admit like, well, I want to lose weight and get healthier. But there's this flawed idea that losing weight and improving your health are the same thing. And yes, although they can and should go hand in hand, the typical American approach to weight loss and health building doesn't do that. And we're going to kind of dive into why that is. So, either way, my motto has always been to work smarter and harder. I've always been the kind of guy, I have no problem working hard. I will put my nose to that grindstone and leave it there until the job is done. But, I've pushed myself very, very hard over the years. And if there's anything I've learned, if you're not working with your body, you're not working intelligently, and you're just running yourself into the ground, that's not conducive to, your health and fitness goals. And so we're going to, again, get into some of the science behind that. But if this is you, you're in the right place. Camp out, get ready. This will probably be a relatively lengthy presentation, but quite frankly, there's enough kind of uh, not helpful information floating around out there already, and you read things that are out of context and a lot of conflicting information. So that's what I do. Yes, I can be long-winded, and yes, I go into in-depth science, but quite frankly, that's what works. It's not like I do this just to be annoying with science and beating people over the head with a bunch of in-depth stuff nobody cares about. That's why I care about it. I'm the type of person, I don't care about stuff that's not related to what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't. I'm a very obsessive, kind of fixated, one-track minded person. So if I took the time to learn all this and dive this deep into the science, it's because it works. It's because it matters. And it's because that's where, the secrets to that great, amazing quality of health and life and fitness really come into play. So if you're fed up and ready for answers, take the time to listen. I'm not kidding. Uh, it's kind of hard to find this information elsewhere. And believe me, I've dove very deep down the rabbit hole of science, and I'm going to be simplifying it and delivering it to you guys in concise, understandable information. I do that with all my clients, and they love it, and they get amazing results when they listen. So make the time if you're fed up and ready to, get the quality of health and life you deserve, to get the results you deserve. Kind of getting a little fired up on my soapbox, but seriously, guys, there's always an answer. There always is. And if somebody doesn't have the answer, they don't know. They haven't taken the time to dig deep enough. So let's get going. So I talked about this in my other webinar. I won't go too much into it, but there is a large gaping hole in our approach to health and fitness. So very briefly, I created this for a different presentation, but it's what I call the healthcare spectrum of we have disease care, which is conventional medicine. And again, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. It would be great if our medical system could be more proactive and help us reach and maintain optimal health rather than just waiting for us to be severely ill. And that's when artificial intervention, drugs, and surgery are implemented with no further recommendation to actually optimize your metabolic function and quality of life. Could go on a tangent about that, but I think we all get it. It is what it is. It's disease care. It's sick care with drugs and surgery. That's it. And that will change over time. Right now, we're kind of in the middle of almost a health revolution, so it'll be interesting to see what the next 10 years bring. And then, of course, on the other side, we have sort of the little bit generic, and I don't say generic as in it's not helpful, but generic as in it applies to everybody with kind of the fitness industry and health coaching and nutrition coaching and all of that good stuff. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion stems from is, we have physicians that don't have answers beyond prescribing drugs, but then we have the other side of the spectrum with, okay, a lot of great information with how to improve your lifestyle and improve your nutrition, improve your activity and fitness level, but kind of generic surface level information that doesn't cater towards your unique metabolic individuality, your unique state of biochemistry, physiology. So that's where functional medicine, functional health, functional nutrition really fills that gap. Now, for the record, quick disclaimer, I'm not a licensed medical provider, so technically I don't practice medicine, but I work deep in this industry and I train practitioners for a living on how to do this kind of work and use functional testing and help people get healthy. And honestly, I can tell you, because I'm deep in the industry, we're all studying the same stuff. Whether you're a medical doctor that decides to go the functional route and go to a functional medicine university, or you're a non-licensed practitioner and you're doing more kind of what we call functional nutrition, it's the same stuff, guys. That's the truth. There's not really much difference there. It's just a matter of, are you using a functional approach for the treatment of disease, or are you using a functional approach for the optimization of metabolic function? It's really kind of more of a legal thing, but either way, we tend to have the answers that nobody else has, and it works really well. So moving on. All right, so what's your approach to diet and exercise? This is obviously something we could talk about all day, but it's kind of that ever vague diet and exercise, and there are tons of variables with that. And that's where, yeah, if you're struggling with that, I do think you need to work with a skilled personal trainer, nutrition coach, health coach, somebody that can put it all together and help you lay that solid foundation, right? So with a lot of the intensive, in-depth healing protocols and stuff that I do with my clients, that's all great, but you have to have the solid foundation. That's what pulls the most weight. Your diet, your lifestyle, your exercise, your rest, your stress management, your environment. So yeah, you need to lay a solid foundation of good lifestyle habits in order to have, the protocols really be effective. But people are just really overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. And so it's time to break out that cycle. Again, kind of glazing over some of this stuff because I did talk about it more in depth in other videos. But here we go. So weight loss resistance, a very real obstacle success. I've talked about this before. It's the same slide from a different presentation, but we're really going to dive deep into the science of it today. So weight loss resistance is a very real phenomena. It's a multifactorial physiological and biochemical phenomena that does interfere with your ability to lose weight and keep it off and feel great and be healthy, and really, achieve everything that you think you should be able to achieve with a kind of diet and exercise regimen. So this is what we're getting into today, guys. If you feel stuck, you don't feel like you're making progress with your approach, there's a reason why. And I'm going to be showing you guys some of the science behind why that might be. So again, on the fitness side of things, you have a lot of people like, oh, well, just more fasted cardio, less carbs. And it's kind of this basically hate yourself enough to kick your own butt into shape and, just suck it up and discipline and just be more disciplined with your diet and more restrictive and, count your calories and your macros and weigh all of your food and, all this stuff and work out harder. And it's like, guys, the secret to improving metabolic function and really enhancing your efforts, enhancing your results, isn't usually a matter of working harder. It's mostly working smarter. Now, yes, I think some people, they probably need to step it up a little bit, but I'm talking to the people that they are doing their part and it's not getting them anywhere and they're getting frustrated about it. That's really who I'm talking to today. If you're kind of slacking and if you need to step it up a little bit, but anywho, moving on here. So when I talk about, metabolic dysfunction as a interference of proper metabolic function, right? This can apply to a lot of things. And so I'm going to just glaze over this and we're just going to get right to it. But when I say metabolic dysfunction, that's just kind of an umbrella term I use to denote any type of malfunction, imbalance, within the body's physiology and biochemistry. This could be something macro, something micro, tons of examples that we'll get into. So then, of course, again, another slide from a different presentation, but, so whereas conventional medicine is reacting to diseases with drugs and surgery, functional practitioners like myself, we're working on the underlying causes. We're looking for underlying contributing factors that will contribute to the progression of dysfunction and eventually disease states. So we're looking to optimize these metabolic pathways and biochemical pathways to really optimize the state of health and hopefully prevent, although that's not like a claim or whatever for legal purposes, but nonetheless, it's a proactive approach to optimal health, not just a reactive model to disease states. So now symptoms, of course, are just going to be a reflection of underlying dysfunction, right? So even though everybody has symptoms to some degree, symptoms are very common, but they're not normal. Now, some symptoms are going to be far and few, others are going to be regular, some are going to be mild, some are going to be severe. But either way, there's going to be underlying dysfunctions that are contributing to those diseases. Now, they could be far removed from the source. You could be experiencing more of like a cognition symptom that is really kind of manifesting in like microbial imbalances in the gut. There's going to be, this far removal at times, which is why we have to investigate pretty thoroughly into digging deeper with your health. We'll very briefly touch on this just because I do think it's worth pointing out. I always look at health as a yin yang where it has to be both. You have to address your psychology and your outlook, but you also have to approach it from a physiological standpoint because they drastically influence one another. If your psychology is suboptimal, you don't have a great outlook or you don't have good kind of mental habits, that will directly impair your physiology and biochemistry, but also the other way around. Like for example, if you're vitamin B6 deficient and you can't properly produce your neurotransmitters that, yield a happy, joyful, mentally focused, motivated cognitive state, it's going to be kind of hard to have good psychology, going to be kind of hard to have a good outlook. And so that's where it's, I could go on a tangent about like when it comes to mental health and, we'll just take Zoloft and talk to a counselor. And it's like, okay, well, none of that is addressing, the underlying cause of why that person feels bad. There's so many dynamics to it and so many gaping holes in the system, but that's where obviously I'm trying to fill that gap. So anywho. All right, so what causes metabolic dysfunction? I know I'm kind of flying through some of this stuff, but I want to get to the juicy content for the day. So what causes metabolic dysfunction? Essentially our health is going to be dictated by the sum of all these following factors. We have genetic predisposition, which we don't have control of, versus epigenetic modulation and expression, aka how does our lifestyle and environment alter the way that our genes are expressed. It's a very cool field. Uh, so then, yeah, environment, toxin exposure, detox capacity, pathogen exposure, immune adequacy, lifestyle factors, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to read the whole list, but I think you guys kind of get the point. So essentially what it comes down to is how much burden is being placed on the system versus, how much recovery is the system getting. It's just like your car, right? If you're just stomping on the gas pedal and you don't ever change the oil, rotate the tires, you're going to wear that car out. But if the car, is low mileage, you maintain it well, then yeah, it's going to increase the longevity and the function of the car. It's just like that with the body, just probably a lot more complex. So really, what causes metabolic dysfunction? The short answer is stress. However, we have to then back up and define what is stress from a physiological standpoint. So that's where I came up with my own definition of stress. I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It's been a while. But what I decided was basically stress is the body's necessity for mental acuity and physical work capacity, aka stress is anything that challenges the body, anything that is a physical burden or mental, emotional, which can turn physiological, but any kind of burden, anything that makes the body work harder, anything that challenges the body, that is going to be perceived as stress. So, it's almost like we have to change the way we look at stress. If like stress equals work, stress equals there are challenges that require work to overcome, and that can be a lot of things that we'll get into. So anyway, some different examples here. But if you're nutrient deficient, like I mentioned a second ago, if you're vitamin B6 deficient, okay, well, think about it. That's a nutrient that is needed for proper metabolic function in a lot of different pathways, like glutathione production, neurotransmitter production, the list goes on and on. So if you're deficient in a nutrient needed for all these different enzymatic reactions, guess what? Your body has to work harder because it doesn't have the equipment needed to get the job done. Or if you have some kind of pathogen or viral exposure like Epstein-Barr virus or, worms and parasites in your gut or fungal overgrowth or Lyme disease, whatever. I mean, think about that. These are foreign microorganisms that are taxing your system and stealing your food and causing inflammation and damage and so on and so forth. So it's challenging on the body. So really, we can break the stressors into three main categories. There's kind of these three categories of stress. So we have biomechanical structural. So, you have a cut on your arm or a herniated disc or, a torn ACL or something. These are structural biomechanical stressors that your body has to work hard to heal and regenerate those tissues, right? And then, of course, psychological emotional stress, which is the most obvious category, which we all are cognizant of. Doesn't mean that we have a grip on it, but we're all at least aware that, that's kind of what we think of when we think of stress, right? So the third category, and this is really where I work and where I specialize, what we call hidden stressors. So these are the biochemical physiological stressors, nutrient deficiencies and pathogen exposure, toxicity from environmental chemicals or heavy metals or what have you. I included a picture of, okay, we got the small intestine magnifying glass showing microbial imbalances with, some different bugs, parasites, bacterial stuff, just because that's probably a really easy example. But these are things that you would never know are there and you would never know are burdening your system unless you went digging for them and tested for them and identified them. And so this is really where I specialize and where I work, is helping people uncover. A lot of people, they're cognizant of their psychological emotional stress and they try to have their outlets for stress reduction and all of that. Most people don't have a grip on it, but they're at least aware of it. Biomechanical structural, I feel like everybody, goes to see a massage or chiropractor, soft tissue person. Like that's super common. What's not common or talked about enough is this area. Now it's improving. There's a lot more information kind of becoming a little bit more mainstream, but it's still just, for one thing, it's very complex. It is, it's extremely complex. It's what I do for a living and what I love. It's kind of my whole life. And yeah, it's incredibly complex. So it's hard for the normal person to really be aware of that unless they are working with a educated practitioner. All right. So one of the things that really, if we kind of zoom out a little bit before we're going to dig deeper and deeper with each slide here. But if we think about the autonomic nervous system, right? So this is the autonomic, kind of the automatic, nervous system in a way. It's really operating a lot of functions of the body that, we don't have to think about, right? We don't have to think about pumping our heart or any of those kind of things. They're just, we don't have to focus and consciously digest our food. Our body just does it, and all these functions are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Now, there's really two branches of this autonomic nervous system. There's the sympathetic, what we call fight or flight side of things. It's stimulating, it's using bodily resources, it's catabolic action, a lot of catabolism going on for the sake of energy availability, for the sake of doing work. So the easy way to think about it, other than fight or flight, you're really, you're burning the candle, you're using up bodily resources, right? So we have our little caveman, and he's being chased by, he's running away from this saber-tooth thing. And then obviously, chill caveman, so he's more in parasympathetic mode of rest and digest, feed and breed. So, you can kind of think about that as more restoring bodily resources and recovery and rebuilding tissues, regenerating tissues. So everything that's more kind of building the body up and increasing health and longevity, whereas sympathetic is breaking down. There's a great book that kind of discusses all these concepts called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which I think is a funny title. But yeah, if you look at animals in nature, they spend most of their time and most of their life in a parasympathetic state. They're playing, they're eating, they're resting, they're hanging out. And then they have these bursts of fight or flight, if they need to hunt and gather, or fight off a predator or run from a predator for the sake of survival. But even like, okay, when they're playing, they might kind of tap into more of a eustress, kind of a beneficial stimulation of sympathetic activity. But the problem today in modern society is we are all in this heightened fight or flight sympathetic mode the vast majority of the time. And so really when it comes to vibrant health, we have to have a balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic activity. Again, are you burning the candle, or are you giving the candle a break or adding wax to the candle? I don't know. But it's like a teeter-totter, right? Where we have to have enough, rest and recovery and nourishment and downtime and all of these things to help us rebuild and grow and restore our health and our bodies. We can't just, stomp on the gas pedal all the time. So, when this is obviously imbalanced right now because most of us are, but when this teeter-totter, this scale balance is neutral, it's balanced, that's really going to be where we feel the best. That's where we're going to have more vibrant health. But, in modern society, again, we are all just so overloaded all the time on the sympathetic side of things. And, if there was one kind of concept that really rules our health, I think this would be it. I really do. The more that you overload this side of the teeter-totter, the more your health will start declining and things start going wrong. So it's very cool stuff. So then when we talk about what controls, these factors, we're really going to get into the what I call the almighty HPA axis. So the HPA axis is really what controls a lot of your sympathetic nervous system activity. So it all starts in the hypothalamus. So HPA, we have hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. So the hypothalamus is constantly detecting the environment, both internal and external, and it's getting these input signals to determine what do we need to do to alter our biochemistry to keep up, right? To keep up with the demands being placed on the system. That's essentially what it comes down to. And so as the hypothalamus is getting these input signals of stress, now here's the thing you guys need to understand. It doesn't matter which category the stress is coming from. It can be the biochemical hidden stressor category. It can be the mental emotional. It can be the biomechanical structural. Doesn't really matter which of the three categories the stress is coming from. It's going to evoke the same biochemical response. And that's a really important concept, because then when you consider the typical American, who has tons of stress coming from all three categories, it's kind of no wonder we're all just sort of in sympathetic overload. So the brain gets that stress signal of like, oh, there's work to be done. There are challenges to the system that we have to work through. And so then that will tell the pituitary gland to release a hormone to tell the adrenal glands to start and initiate that stress response that we're going to go into. And so cortisol is our body's primary stress response hormone. I really don't like calling it a stress hormone because that makes it sound like a bad thing. It's a stress response hormone. It gives us the fight or flight, stimulating nutrient availability, energy, and function so that we can overcome the stress, that we can get the work done, get the job done. So it's kind of like, the police, right? They're not the stress responders. They're they respond to stress, like they come save the day. That's what cortisol is really there for. So I don't think it should be called stress hormone, stress response hormone. But some of the main functions of cortisol, so you guys, should be familiar with these, so it makes sense as we proceed. But one of the main functions, raising blood sugar via gluconeogenesis. Well, it can liberate glycogen and raise blood sugar a number of different ways. But yes, in excess, it can actually break down skeletal muscle and take those amino acids to gluconeogenize them to manufacture glucose in the liver. But it can also liberate glycogen from skeletal muscle in the liver with help of glucagon. And anyways, but it raises blood sugar. It's very anti-inflammatory. So that's why, people with a lot of inflammation issues, they'll just hit them with a cortisone shot. So that way it gets activated into cortisol and fights the inflammation. Enhances norepinephrine, aka adrenaline. So those two hormones work synergistically together. Now, I will say that cortisol in a lot of ways is kind of like a long-acting adrenaline, and we'll talk about that. Aids in nutrient metabolism. It's a very stimulating get up and go hormone. It is our primary get up and go, do stuff hormone. It's highest in the morning. It gradually drops off throughout the day until it's lowest at night. But it's highest in the morning to promote that wakefulness. It is what wakes us up in the morning. Melatonin goes down in the early morning hours, cortisol goes up, you wake up, you get out of bed, and in that first 45 minutes, about 50-60% of your cortisol for the day is pumped out in the cortisol awakening response. And that is to give you that surge of get up and go energy, start your day, or go hunt and gather. So that's where I think thinking of things in evolutionary terms makes it make more sense. Like, why would our body do this? Let's look at evolution. Well, gee, that makes sense. Now, it does suppress immune activity because, again, immune activity, our immune system there to protect us from foreign pathogens and invaders and all of that. That is more parasympathetic activity, right? I mean, that is going to be more rest and digest, kind of feed and breed, restore the body, protect the body, all of that. So again, when we tip that scale into sympathetic overload, yeah, you are going to suppress things like digestion and immune activity. So as you can see, suppresses immune activity, slows digestion. It's antagonistic to insulin and melatonin. So insulin obviously lowers blood sugar. It basically, crams the nutrients into the cells, or it kind of knocks on the door of the cell, and the GLUT4 transporter will come up to the cell wall and grab that glucose and take it into the cell for either storage or a few different pathways there. But either way, and then of course melatonin regulates our sleep-wake cycle in conjunction with cortisol, so they're antagonistic. So as you can see, cortisol has a lot of really important functions here. Decreases bone formation because, again, guys, building up the body, whether it's using immune function to fight off invaders, or focusing on digestion and absorption of nutrients, or bone formation, these are all rest and recovery parasympathetic activities. Cortisol is a sympathetic, gas pedal stomper, so to speak. So I want you guys to be familiar with cortisol, because then now we're going to get into the progression of HPA axis dysfunction, which I think just about every American has to, or I mean, not just American, every person has to some degree, just because, again, we have so many bricks and weight on the sympathetic side of that teeter-totter, and we just don't have enough parasympathetic activity, not enough downtime, not enough rest, not enough digestion and nourishment and food and de-stress and all of that. So basically what happens Really handy chart here. We have the y-axis of your cortisol sum, so you can think about how much cortisol your body produces and secretes in a 24-hour period. So that's what we're looking at here. And then the x-axis is simply progression over time. So when we're healthy, we're happy, we have that teeter-totter balance, right? We have that balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic activity. We're in a state of homeostasis. Now, most of us are not here, but once upon a time we were. This is where we should be. This is where we want to be. So as you can see, you're going to have a healthy baseline of cortisol. You need cortisol for proper metabolic function, but we don't want it to be too high or too low. So this is normal healthy. Now, when the body comes under stress, and again, it doesn't matter which category. So let's use 3 examples. Let's say we have a person, a client, somebody, and they sprain their ankle, they get fired from their job, or maybe they broke up with somebody, I don't know, whichever. And then let's say they have heavy metal amalgams in their mouth, dental amalgams, and maybe a parasite in their gut. So right there, they have multiple stressors from multiple categories of stress that are really challenging the system. And then of course, keep in mind they're overworked, they don't get enough quality sleep, they don't have a good diet, so they're very malnourished. The list goes on and on. Guys, this is somebody that is just set up for, stress overload. So that hypothalamus gets all of these input signals and whoa, we need more cortisol to overcome all of these stressors and challenges, right? So then the adrenal glands will start pumping out more cortisol to help you overcome all of that. That's what it does. So I think you guys get the point. Now, when we're here, we're probably going to feel pretty good because we have all this stimulation, all this cortisol helping us kick butt at life, and we're kind of keeping up for a while at first. But then, guys, it's just like your car, right? If you stomp on the gas pedal for too long and you don't give the car more gas, you don't change the oil, you don't rotate the tires, it's literally just a matter of time before that car's going to start giving out. The engine starts making funky sounds, or the tires are starting to get a little wobbly, whatever the case is, the engine's starting to sputter. So yeah, you're pedal to the metal for too long, and eventually that system will start collapsing. And so that's where you hit this kind of phase 2 compensatory stage. And this is usually going to be where people are starting to feel kind of lousy and more symptomatic. And, maybe it starts as more like hormonal symptoms, but then it very quickly cascades into other systems because everything's connected, and it's kind of this domino cascade of dysfunction and whatnot. And then of course, if you just keep pushing the pedal to the metal for too long, yeah, that system will just collapse, and that's where people really feel pretty awful. And I would say the majority of, like, every now and then I'll have a client that's kind of more in this acute phase, but most of them are already kind of collapsed into the exhausted phase, and that's a lot harder to come back from. You can, but you definitely almost like have to take a hiatus from life and really focus on healing your body. So yeah, it's tough. All right, so when we're talking about cortisol, we really also have to talk about some of the other steroid hormones. So bear with me here. Believe me, I wouldn't be presenting all of this if it wasn't important. So this is a very simplified steroid hormone metabolic pathway chart. So a few key concepts I want to point out on this more simplistic chart for you guys to familiarize yourselves with. So first and foremost, we can see at the top that we have, dietary fats and different nutrients like vitamin B5. These things come together to produce acetyl coenzyme A, which is what we manufacture cholesterol from, and then we can produce cholesterol in the liver, package it up into lipoproteins, and shuttle it all over the body to deliver that cholesterol to various tissues. Now, I don't want to go into a lecture about cholesterol, but this is an extremely important lipid substance in the body. We need it for healthy cell membranes for every one of your 150 plus trillion cells in your body. And it is what we actually use to synthesize your steroid hormones, so pretty important. So then it makes really no sense of like, oh, well, you have an increased risk of heart disease, we think, so let's just put you on a statin to suppress your cholesterol production. Like, what is that actually doing? Pretty silly. But anyways, So one important takeaway is that ultimately your hormones, just like everything in your body, come from your food ultimately. You have to ingest the right nutrients to be able to manufacture anything in the body, but in particular your hormones. So that's where sometimes you hear people say stuff like, a low fat diet is a low hormone diet, which is kind of an overly simplistic statement. But yes, ultimately, it is our food and fats and nutrients that provide the building blocks so we can manufacture our hormones. So that's bullet point one, or takeaway point number one. And then, so we take cholesterol and we manufacture pregnenolone. Now we can do this in various endocrine tissues like the gonads, adrenals, et cetera, et cetera. So when the endocrine tissue will kind of take up this cholesterol and it'll produce pregnenolone in the mitochondria. So pregnenolone is kind of the mother steroid hormone, right? So once we manufacture pregnenolone, we can then convert the pregnenolone into all of our other steroid hormones. So takeaway point number two, all of your hormones, or at least your steroid hormones with, cortisol and estradiol, testosterone, DHEA, all these things are made from the same substances. They're basically isomers of one another. One enzymatic reaction, and this hormone becomes that hormone. Like, a lot of people don't realize that. Guess what, guys and girls? Estradiol is made from testosterone. Testosterone gets aromatized into estradiol, and there are factors that will upregulate that mechanism. So, we can't think of your hormones as independent things. They're all interconnected. So takeaway point two. So then we have kind of, again, this is a simplistic chart. We're going to look at a more complex one in a second, but you can see that there's sort of the left side of the pathway and then the right side of the pathway. So essentially what happens is, we're either going to convert that pregnenolone into progesterone and then onto cortisol or aldosterone, which is a mineralocorticoid for electrolyte regulation and all of that. Or, we're going to kind of shunt that pregnenolone down sort of the right side of the pathway into dehydroepiandrosterone, or DHEA, which is the direct precursor to your sex hormones or fertility hormones like testosterone and androgens and estrogens, so particularly testosterone and estradiol. So the thing is, now this is kind of simplistic and we'll get a little bit deeper, but think about this. So if your body only has so many resources, right? Resources are limited. It's not like you have endless nutrients and cholesterol and, you can just produce endless amounts of hormone. You only, your resources are finite. So then it's a question of, what does your body need more of right now? And what is it equipped to produce? So there's the demand versus supply. So supply and demand, there you go. So the thing is, when your body is under chronic stress, again, from all three categories, which we're all bombarded with a lot of stress from all three categories, your body's going to prioritize the production of cortisol over things like fertility hormones, like testosterone and estradiol and all that. Why? Because cortisol keeps you alive. So that's where I really like to think about, like, an evolutionary context. So if you're a hunter-gatherer, you're in the Paleolithic time period and whatever, and you're a hunter-gatherer, and, like, let's say there's a famine. That's a big deal. You're gonna have to go migrate across the land to go find food for your little cave herd or whatever. So cortisol really drives us towards survival, and survival always comes before fertility. Think about that. From an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. If you can't survive as a species, there's no point in being fertile. Survival comes before fertility. So let's use a 21st century example. Let's use a weight loss example. So you have a woman who, very motivated to lose weight, right? So then she goes on a restrictive diet. She's cutting calories. She is improving the quality of her food a little bit, but she really just doesn't know how to properly fuel her body, and she's more focused on restricting portions for the sake of weight loss, right? You got to eat less, you got to work out harder. Like, sure, eat better, but you got to lose weight. So you got to go catabolic and kind of waste away. So this is kind of your, like, the Biggest Loser approach, right? I can't believe that show ever existed. It's a disgrace to humanity, and a kick, yeah, but just a kick against science. Horrible. But anyways, kind of biggest loser approach, right? So, you're drastically increasing the activity, you're cutting down on calories, and of course you're malnourished, and you already have a dysfunctional metabolism, and you're not doing anything to heal that. You're just trying to waste away to get smaller and lose weight. What do you think that's going to do to your hormones? What do you think your hypothalamus is going to be thinking? It's going to be like, holy crap, this is a lot of stress. We're malnourished, we're underfed, we're working out really hard. Sympathetic overload, we need a lot more cortisol. If you take a woman and put her into that scenario, this is the woman that's, kind of a chronic exerciser, and she's the one at 5 a.m. on the Stairmaster doing fasted cardio, and then she goes and eats a salad with half a chicken breast and, a few berries on it or something. What's one of the first things that happens to those women? They lose their period. Why? Because of what I just said. The body is highly prioritizing the production of cortisol. So things like estradiol and progesterone and all of that, forget that. Why would you need to be fertile? Your body's trying to survive. It's in survival mode, not fertility mode. So that's the thing. I think sex drive, I mean, not just, menses is one thing. That's a pretty obvious one. Or I guess it's not for most people, but it should be. How many times do you hear people like, oh, yeah, my cycle's irregular, or I lost my period, and it's like, if you're under the age of like 48 and you're a woman and you have irregular cycles, that's not normal. And I guarantee you there's dysfunction happening in these pathways. Your body's stressed out. So anyways, I think you guys get the point on that, but it's pretty interesting stuff. So that's what's going on there. I see it all the time. Stop it. So anyways, but that's what I was saying, with libido and sex drive. I think that's a great indicator to some degree of metabolic health. If you're dieting and exercising and trying to lose weight, and your libido, your motivation is going down, you're starting to get symptomatic, joints are starting to hurt, but not just motivation is going down, but libido is going down. Hey, guess what's going on here? So this is a more complex diagram. I actually prefer using this one, but it's a little bit easier to understand with that last one here. Zoom in just a little bit. So this is actually my favorite hormone test that I use with basically every client that I work with, because on that test, every one of the green bubble hormones, so all the hormones with a green bubble around it, are hormones and metabolites that we're measuring on this urine test. It's an amazing test, and widely considered kind of the most comprehensive hormone test. But anyways, it's the same idea. So here's your cholesterol, pregnenolone, and then all these different enzymatic reactions that will lead to all of your other hormones. Now, this is happening in various tissues, so you got the testes and the ovaries and the adrenal glands all soaking up cholesterol, and, each tissue can manufacture different hormones. So like the adrenal cortex is where a lot of these steroid hormones like cortisol and aldosterone and stuff are made, whereas like, the adrenal medulla is actually cranking out catecholamines and neurotransmitters and stuff. But anywho, so the only thing I'll point out on this pathway chart is, the way I like to describe it to the professionals that I train for a living is kind of like, okay, if you think about this over here, like where my cursor is, if this was a funnel, and then every green bubble is kind of like a cup or a glass, right? And the question is, if this is a big piping system, there's all these pipes that are connected to one another. The question becomes, when you pour water into the top of the funnel, where does the water come out? Which glass gets filled up? If we're really thirsty for, let's say testosterone, everybody loves testosterone, muscle building, fat burning, sex drive, feeling great, conquering the world. Testosterone drives a lot of that. So let's say you have low testosterone and you're really thirsty for testosterone. Well, okay, so when you pour water in, maybe that glass isn't getting filled up. Maybe though your estradiol glass is overflowing. Estrogen dominance is a very, very common thing I see these days in both men and women, and we'll look at that a little bit more. So, one thing that is really fun with what I do is we can really identify and get clues behind, well, okay, which of your glasses are overflowing, which versus which are, kind of bone dry and empty. But so we see that I mentioned earlier, testosterone gets aromatized via the CYP19 enzyme, the aromatase enzyme. So testosterone gets converted into estradiol. So the thing is, what factors will upregulate or downregulate that enzymatic reaction, assuming there's enough substrate. But so that's where, okay, inflammation, excess body fat, high insulin levels, forskolin, alcohol, all of these kind of lifestyle and kind of nutrient factors will upregulate aromatase activity and cause you to convert more testosterone into estradiol. Whereas on the flip side of that, what are different things that we can do to decrease that activity? Blood sugar regulation, because that's obviously the opposite of high insulin. If we can sensitize your cells to insulin, and the pancreas doesn't have to produce as much. But things like zinc or grapeseed extract, these are kind of aromatase down regulators. Don't get too caught up there, because I know where some of you guys are thinking with that. It gets more complex, so don't just start taking that stuff and think that you're going to balance your hormones. Anyways, so very important to understand. So that's the thing, is we can identify. Actually, here's another example worth pointing out. So cortisol to cortisone. Cortisone is the inactive form of cortisol. Cortisol is really what does the job when it comes to fighting inflammation and raising blood sugar. Now, cortisol is actually a good fat releasing hormone. It has both fat storing and fat releasing mechanisms. It upregulates hormone sensitive lipase and lipoprotein lipase. Hormone sensitive lipase is kind of your body's main fat releasing hormone, fat liberating hormone, whereas lipoprotein lipase is a fat storage hormone. Essentially, it cuts a triglyceride into its constituent pieces so that it can get absorbed into the cell for storage. Hormone sensitive lipase kind of is the opposite. It releases fat, liberates fat. Anyways, but so different factors will cause there to either be more cortisone, which is inactive, or cortisol. And yes, I measure all of these things on my test, so then I can see what's going on. And, we can obviously give some very specific recommendations on how we can fix that dysfunction. But for example, if you're hyperthyroid, or you have high levels of human growth hormone or estradiol or testosterone, or, some of these different kind of supplemental things, it will all, lead cortisol to be deactivated into cortisone via this enzyme here, 11-beta HSD. So, whereas on the flip side of that, more cortisol, if you're hypothyroid, or you're taking licorice root extract, or you have a lot of inflammation, or visceral fat, high insulin levels, excess sodium, all of these factors will lead to the conversion of cortisone into cortisol because it needs to be activated, right? So anyways, we'll move on. I just want to give you guys a few concrete examples. All right. So here's where we're going to get even more fun. So we talked about the HPA axis. Now, the endocrine system, you guys need to understand everything in the endocrine system is very interconnected. I mean, really everything in the body is connected, but especially with the endocrine system. So there's the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, and then there's the HPT axis, or hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid. But then, of course, there's the OAT axis, which is ovarian, adrenal, thyroid, or the testy, adrenal, thyroid axis. But don't get caught up in the different axes, but really just understand that the whole endocrine system is interconnected and it will influence one another. So it's not like, oh, well, it's just my cortisol and my adrenals that's a problem. No, it's going to cascade into the other factors. So the HPT axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid. So the hypothalamus dictates what needs to be done with thyroid balance in the body, and it'll tell the pituitary to produce TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, to tell the thyroid to start producing T4, right? Which then gets converted to active T3. So that's the thing, like, you go to your doctor's office and they just look at TSH and maybe they look at T4 and that's it. And like, oh, well, it's high or low. So you're either hypothyroid or you're fine. Everything looks fine. And then with these really broad reference ranges, I mean, again, it's disease care. I don't want to go on a tangent about that, but there's so many people that are subclinical hypothyroid or autoimmune hypothyroid and Hashimoto's and Graves and stuff like that. And it's just largely not diagnosed properly, not treated properly, or, just oh, well, you just have to take Synthroid for the rest of your life, and maybe we have to cut out your thyroid eventually. It's a bunch of bullshit, honestly. Sorry to say that, but it just, ugh. Okay, so thyroid hormone, free T3. Free T3 is really what runs the show in regards to thyroid function. So, what are some key metabolic functions of thyroid hormone? It is the accelerator of your metabolic function. So just about every metabolic process is going to be enhanced, fueled, initiated by thyroid hormone, T3 particularly. Free T3, again, runs the show. So brain development, hormone synthesis and metabolism, fat burning, which is probably what you guys care about the most. Stomach acid production, gastromotility, gallbladder and liver function, protein synthesis, insulin, glucose metabolism, bone formation, lipid utilization, body temperature, pregnancy and fertility. Every single cell, your body is made up of about 100, 150 trillion cells. Every single cell has receptors for thyroid hormone and actually vitamin D, fun fact. But either way, so thyroid hormone and thyroid function is immensely, immensely important. So the thing is, the HPA and the HPT axis are very interconnected, very much so. So if you have HPA axis dysfunction, it'll very quickly impair thyroid function. So that's the thing, guys. So many people care about the thyroid. I can tell you from experience when I post stuff on my Facebook page, the posts that I put out there about the thyroid get the most likes, get the most attention, get the most views, all of that stuff. It's very trendy, and everybody, oh, it must be my thyroid. Something's wrong with my thyroid. And it's not that it's wrong to think that way. It's just it's overly simplistic and it's a bigger picture, which is why I'm doing this presentation. But the thyroid it's not usually the primary dysfunction. I'll just get to the point. Usually thyroid issues either started as gut issues or adrenal issues. For the most part, there's more than that, but those are kind of the two major things. Gut issues and adrenal issues lead to thyroid issues. But then the problem is once the thyroid goes haywire, it exacerbates everything else because the thyroid is so powerful and affects so many physiological functions. So that's what really sucks is like, well, maybe it didn't start as a thyroid issue, but then once it turns into a thyroid issue, it makes everything else worse. So this is a chart kind of showing some of the mechanisms of how adrenal function will directly affect thyroid function. And so actually when your brain is getting excess signals for cortisol production, it will shut down or deaccelerate thyroid function. So for example, like high levels of cortisol inhibit the conversion of T4 to T3. So T4 doesn't really do a whole lot. Now, yes, it does have important functions. So don't be like, oh, well, he said T4 is not important. Not true, it is. But T3 is 5 times more metabolically active and potent and driving metabolic function. So here's another chart that is maybe a little bit cleaner to look at. Again, like I said, every cell in the body has receptors for thyroid hormone. But so stress, again, as we've already talked about, no matter which category it's coming from, and then of course we're all being bombarded from all 3 categories, it will throw off these axes where CRH actually inhibits TSH, cortisol inhibits TSH, on top of cortisol will inhibit T4 to T3. Now that's excess cortisol, so that's where we have to have cortisol in that sweet spot, and vice versa. And that's where looking at the steroid hormone pathway chart, we can see these different factors because the body's just trying to self-regulate. The body's just always trying to maintain homeostasis or achieve homeostasis. So it will alter its biochemical mechanisms to maintain a sense of balance. So that's where we do have to achieve that balance for optimal health and vitality and all of that. So it's really cool stuff. But you can kind of read some of that here. All right. So then different causes of dysfunction. Now this really gets back to what we already talked about earlier in the presentation. But nonetheless, here's a list of kind of specific dysfunctions that will impair the HPA and HPT axis. So with the HPA axis, perceived stress, which again is why that outlook, that psychology is part of it. Yes, emotional, mental stress, it's not the full picture, but yeah, if you're one of those people that you let everything get to you, you're stressing yourself out even more. You believe me, you don't need any more stress, so don't self-induce. Goodness. Overly negative people or worriers and stuff like that. Now, of course, then there's the physiological side of why are they more prone to that, which can get into, all sorts of nutrient pathways. And that's one of my favorite subjects, nutrigenomics and genetic polymorphisms that, will alter your behavior. So there is that side of it. But circadian disruption, glycemic dysregulation, so blood sugar issues, over or under exercising, got to have that right balance of stimuli, gut pathogens, dysbiosis, bacterial imbalances, chronic infections, food sensitivities, environmental toxins, heavy metals, mold and biotoxin exposure, toxic chemicals, EMF, Wi-Fi, microwave, etc., nutrient deficiencies. All of these things are going to be sort of those underlying contributors to HPA axis dysfunction. And we'll talk about that more as we go. That's one thing that I train, other practitioners and whatnot, because people get overly fixated on hormones. They think, oh, well, my problem is my hormones are off, so what do I need to do to fix my hormones? Or do I just take hormones? No, that's not the answer. It's a matter of what is causing the hormones to go out of balance in the first place. So it's really what are the underlying causes that are messing up your hormones. Your hormones might explain why you feel the way you feel, why you look the way you look, all of that. But it's a matter of what caused the hormones to go out of balance in the first place. So that's where obviously by laying a solid foundation of healthy lifestyle habits, good stress management, good rest and sleep, proper amounts of exercise, a very nourishing, appropriate diet, good clean environment, plenty of time outside, limiting all these things, that lays the foundation. And then we can further investigate like, oh, well, maybe you picked up a parasite, on your cruise to Mexico, or, oh, you got bit by a tick and you have, Lyme disease, or, oh, well, you live in a house with mold and that's causing chronic inflammatory responses in the body, or, it's just the list goes on and on. It's about what burdens the system and what provokes the hormonal imbalances in the first place. So then looking at the HPT axis, it's a lot of the same stuff. But autoimmunity and gluten sensitivity and infections, like we talked about, toxic load, gut dysfunction, liver dysfunction, HPA axis dysfunction, as we already looked at some of the mechanisms behind that, inflammation, receptor resistance, so on and so forth. So you guys can read that list. But all the different things that will cause the adrenals and thyroid to go out of whack. Now, this presentation, I didn't want to say it in the beginning, but we're really focusing on the HPA and HPT axis. We're not necessarily going to get that much into testosterone, estrogen, sex hormones, or really be talking too much about the underlying causes, but I can't really reiterate that enough. But I want to keep it a little bit focused because we don't have time to, we can't talk about everything in one presentation. There will be more, guys. All right, so reverse T3, this is your body outsmarting you. And if you've made it this far in the presentation, good for you. If you haven't, you maybe just don't care enough about feeling good to make the time for it. I don't mean that to be mean, it's just the truth. But reverse T3, your body outsmarting you. I think reverse T3 is one of the most fascinating mechanisms of human biochemistry because it's such a good reflection on basically your body will outsmart you. You can try all you want of I'm just going to work out harder, I'll eat cleaner and just force my body to do what I want. Good luck with that. Won't happen. So reverse T3. Free T3 is what stomps on the gas pedal of metabolic function. Reverse T3 stomps on the brakes, or is the brakes, right? So reverse T3 is exactly as the name implies. So you have free T3, you have T4 that gets produced by thyroid, and that gets converted by deiodinase enzymes into T3 as, we cleave off one of the iodine atoms. But when we convert T4, some of it will get converted to free T3, and some of it will get converted to a isomer analog reverse T3. Now, as you can see, it's an isomer. It has almost an identical structure. Iodine, 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 missing an iodine, 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 missing an iodine. The only difference is where the iodine atom is missing, but it drastically changes the function. So whereas T3, it accelerates metabolic function, reverse T3 halts metabolic function. Why? Because it's receptor availability. You have, these are cells and these are hormone receptors sitting on the surface of the cell. So the hormone comes up and binds to the appropriate receptor. So the thing is, T3 and reverse T3, it's kind of like a lock and key. They both are the same shape for the most part. There's that small difference. So whereas free T3, unlocks the door and, fuels metabolic function, particularly fat loss, which is what you guys all care about. Reverse T3 will bind to that receptor and just sit there. It doesn't unlock the door. All it does is blocks T3 from doing its job. So let me say that again. Reverse T3 blocks free T3 from doing its job. Now you might think, why on earth would the body do that? Like, why would the body do that? It's a survival mechanism. There's a lot of kind of theories that investigate that, even like hibernation response and stuff like that. But essentially, it's a stress response. It's a survival response. The body doesn't want to just burn up all of its resources and fuel metabolic function. If it needs to slow down the metabolism for the sake of, conserving energy for survival, that's what it'll do. So that's one of the number one things. And, I will flip to the next slide, but I see this all the time, especially, okay, what raises reverse T3? The thyroid will raise reverse T3 as a survival mechanism by slowing down metabolic processes. Contributors include HPA dysfunction, heavy metal toxicity, inflammation, chronic infections, overexercising, malnourishment, insulin resistance, liver dysfunction, low calorie or very low carb diet, and overexercising. What are most of people doing when they're trying to lose weight? They already have a dysfunctional metabolism. They're probably already subclinical hypothyroid and adrenal issues and all sorts of other issues that they have no clue. But then they just try to exercise and eat less carbs. And, I see this all the time, especially when people like ketosis has all of a sudden become like the cool thing, which I have my experience with and I know a lot about. I see this all the time. And then they wonder why they're not getting results because they're putting such a burden and a weird stimuli on the system, and the body is adapting and fighting back and preventing you from outsmarting it. All the time. I can't tell you how often I see this. And it's like, you wonder why you're not losing weight. You're already dysfunctional, and now you're tanking your adrenals, jacking up your thyroid even more. So let's work smarter. So symptoms of HPA axis issues. Now this is really just kind of in regards to high cortisol, low cortisol, which can fluctuate. You might have times a day where you have too much cortisol, and you might have times of the day you have too little. I actually myself in the morning, I kind of have a little bit more than needed, whereas in the middle of the day my cortisol really tanks a lot. And I feel it, and we could talk about that more. But either way, go ahead and read this list. A lot of different symptoms related to high and or low cortisol that we can investigate. So, either pause the presentation if you want to read this or whatever. I'm not going to read through the full list for you, but some good relevant symptoms. So if a lot of these apply to you, we should talk. And then symptoms of hypothalamus pituitary thyroid dysfunction, hyperthyroid, hypothyroid. I work with a lot of thyroid conditions in my practice. I have a lot of, more women than men. Women are more susceptible to a lot of this, unfortunately. Gets into a lot of mechanisms as far as why. I work with a lot of thyroid stuff, a lot of autoimmune thyroid stuff, Hashimoto's in particular. Right now I have, I think, 5 women clients all working through Hashimoto's protocols, and it's going extremely well. Yeah, so that's cool. But hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, again, you can pause, read through this list, but if this all sounds familiar, we should probably talk. And we should work smarter. not just harder. All right, a lot of science. Let's get into some case studies here, guys. All right, so case study number one. One thing I will say right off the bat, the only testing that I'm showing in this presentation is the hormone testing, because I'm investigating their adrenal function and steroid hormones, which we're not really talking about a ton today. And then their thyroid function and insulin and blood sugar regulation. So we're kind of keeping it, again, focused on the HPA and HPT axis. But let me just say, no, I don't just run hormone testing and that's all I do. No, I'm looking for the underlying causes. So I do a lot of gut testing like GI pathogens and heavy metal testing, nutrient deficiencies. The list goes on and on. Yes, I do a lot of hormone testing with most of my clients because we need to understand why they feel the way they feel. What state of function is the adrenals and thyroid? How well are these big systems working? But then, the real trick is digging deeper to figure out, well, what's provoking that? So, food sensitivities and environmental toxins, heavy metals, GI pathogens, viruses, nutrient deficiencies, the list goes on and on. So again, I can't say that enough, but it's not just the hormones, it's what's throwing the hormones out of balance in the first place, removing those sources of stress. And if we have to dig deep to find those hidden stressors, then that's what we have to do. Anyways, but case study one. So this is a client that has polycystic ovarian syndrome, subclinical hypothyroid, and insulin resistance. Now that's only based on her hormones. Again, this individual did do other testing to, look for those underlying causes. But as far as the hormones, this is kind of what we broke down to. So you can see down here, she had very, very low free cortisol throughout the day. You see her sum there at 76, which is, below range, just really tanked out. However, her cortisol production was high, and we just don't have time to get into some of the details. I just want to kind of give an overview. Obviously, when we go through your test results together, we can talk all we want about this stuff, and I will go very in depth to help your understanding. But anyways, with this metabolized cortisol, this is measuring the metabolite breakdown products of cortisol. And so when you add all those together, you get a gauge of, well, how much cortisol was produced in the first place versus how much of that cortisol is free. It's not bound to transport proteins. It's available to get into the cell and do what it's supposed to do. So there's bound hormones that are really just bound up for transportation. And then there's free hormone, which is free to do its job. Anyway, so this is an individual that has high cortisol production with very low cortisol availability, which is very common when you have insulin resistance. So we can see over here, her insulin levels were 20. That should be more like 3 or 4. They were at 20. So very insulin resistant. The pancreas is screaming like, hey, cells, listen to me and uptake some blood sugar. So a lot of blood sugar dysregulation issues. But yeah, very low free cortisol and a lot of symptoms that relate to that. Estrogen was a bit too low, progesterone very low, not ovulating, irregular cycles, amenorrhea, and then very high androgens and, experiencing a lot of high androgen symptoms. So this is kind of your classic PCOS type scenario. And then, looking at her thyroid function, her free T4 was low. Free T3 looked okay though. Free T4 was a little on the low side, but free T3 looks okay. However, you look at her reverse T3. So this is a good scenario where, again, we really have to look at the full picture and why, looking at TSH, T4 wouldn't have really told us much of anything. But then if you did also look at T3, well, even that's not enough because you'd be like, oh, well, her free T3 looks good, so she probably shouldn't be experiencing hypothyroid symptoms or any of that, but she is. Why? Because reverse T3 is elevated enough to block that T3 from doing its job, and again, it's not just fat loss, but that's kind of, I guess the focal point of what we're talking about today, but it's everything that the thyroid does is being slowed down, digestion and transit time and bone turnover and muscle turnover, the list goes on. And then we can see your vitamin D was low too, HbA1c was high. But yeah, so this person is going to have a very difficult time losing fat. And, how do we got to put her on a very specialized protocol to fix all that, which she's in the middle of doing. So very cool stuff. We could really talk about a lot of this all day, so I'm just kind of giving some examples here. But case study 2, estrogen dominance, subclinical hypothyroid with possible autoimmunity, insulin resistant. So, similar, but not really the same. So this individual has, low side free cortisol, and actually even kind of lower end cortisol production. So this is kind of more that sort of stage 2 compensatory phase, as far as the phases of adrenal dysfunction, which is kind of overly simplistic. But it's a good model for understanding it. Estrogen through the roof. Talk about hard to lose fat. So here's a fun fact for you women out there that might be listening, especially like lower body fat, right? Like, oh, I have a hard time losing fat from my thighs and my hips and stuff like that. Or you'll see women that, they lose fat from their upper body, but not their lower body, or they have a hard time losing that lower body fat. That's largely, this is a little secret, fun fact. So some of your most potent fat burning hormones are your catecholamines. So epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline, which are produced in the adrenal medulla. So kind of the center of the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys. Now, these are kind of neurotransmitter catecholamines, but they're very potent fat-burning hormones. And there's 2 types of receptors that these catecholamines can bond to or bind to trigger intracellular signaling and fat burning and all that good stuff. So there's the beta and alpha adrenergic receptors. Okay. So alpha and beta adrenergic receptors. Now, beta receptors trigger a lot more fat loss than alpha receptors. Okay. So first off, you have to have enough catecholamine production to stimulate that fat loss response. So that's where if you do have kind of impaired neurotransmitter pathways and adrenal function, you probably won't have enough catecholamines in the first place, which I see very commonly, and is actually, we get some clues on that on this test. Gosh, I love this test. But then estrogen is the other side of the equation. So then estrogen in the lower body fat cells and all of that, on these fat cells in the lower body, you have these alpha and beta receptors. However, higher levels of estrogen will decrease how many beta receptors there are. Again, beta receptors release more fat, or they trigger more fat loss than alpha receptors. So women that have a hard time losing lower body fat, it's usually a combination of low catecholamine output from the adrenals and higher levels of estrogen that's decreasing how many beta receptors they have on those fat cells in the lower body. So I do actually have a specialized like lower body fat burning protocol that targets those mechanisms. But a little fun fact there. But anyways, you can see, the estrogen was through the roof. Talk about making it hard to lose fat. Cortisol, which again is kind of a fat storing and fat burning hormone, depending on which hormones it's hanging out with. If you combine cortisol with testosterone and growth hormone, thyroid hormone, and catecholamines, that is a recipe for fat loss. If you combine cortisol with insulin, that's a recipe for in high estrogen and stuff like that. That's a recipe for fat storage. And as you can see, her testosterone was very low. It's going to make it hard to build muscle and burn fat and have good libido and all of that good stuff, motivation, focus. Then looking at her thyroid, look, her free T3 is low. Reverse T3 is high. Her free T3 to reverse T3 ratio is low. Talk about a recipe for, again, de-accelerating fat loss, right? So she is experiencing a lot of hypothyroid symptoms. So she's estrogen dominant, she's insulin resistant, the hypothyroid, maybe a little bit of autoimmunity going on based on her TPO antibody being double digits. I like to see that less than 10, single digits. So suggesting a little bit of autoimmune activity going on. I have had multiple, I want to say 4 in the past year, client that had Hashimoto's, and we put into remission through an all-natural protocol. So that's kind of neat. Actually, just one yesterday that came back and boom, a few months on specialized protocol and got that taken care of. Conventional medicine hasn't done that yet. Case study 3, estrogen dominant, subclinical hypothyroid, insulin resistance. A very similar picture. This was a fun one though. So again, screaming estrogen levels. Look at that. Lower body fat was definitely an issue for this individual. Look at that testosterone through the floor, just non-existent. And then her though, different cortisol pattern. So I tried to pick out 3 different examples with the adrenal function of, one that's kind of more that exhaustive phase, your compensatory phase, and then the first one was high production, low availability. This is more that acute phase though. Look at that. High production, high availability. Look at that cortisol pattern down here. This is kind of cool. I'll zoom in a little bit. Yeah, really high cortisol levels all day. Not good, especially when you combine that with high levels of insulin and insulin resistance and stuff. And then her thyroid, she didn't do a full thyroid panel. This is what she got from, I think her doctor did some testing, but they left off, like I gave her a list of things to have her doctor run, and they didn't quite provide me with the whole list I wanted, go figure. But they did give me enough to get an idea. So her free T4 was low, her reverse T3 was high, antibodies were fine though, vitamin D was low, homocysteine was high. Anyways, so I think you guys kind of get the point though. But again, all 3 of these women were overweight and very much struggling to lose weight. So got to work through that. And then case study number 4 here. This is a new client that I'm just beginning my work with, and I'm really excited. Literally just a week into her protocol, and her pain and bloating, some of those issues have improved quite a bit already, and we haven't even really gotten started with the good stuff yet, so that's pretty cool. But she's perimenopausal, Hashimoto's, insulin resistant. Wicked combination. So, very low sex hormones across the board because she is in that perimenopausal state. But then adrenal function, high production, low availability, which is largely caused by insulin resistance. Which on that note, why does the body do that? Like, why would the body produce high amounts of cortisol? Well, it's stressed out. But why would it deactivate cortisol and not have it as free available cortisol? Well, if you have insulin resistance, you have a hard time lowering blood sugar, right? What's one of cortisol's primary jobs? To raise blood sugar. If you already have blood sugar that's too high and unstable, but then the body's really stressed out and is producing a lot of cortisol, which raises blood sugar, the body's smart. It'll deactivate that cortisol to prevent the excess cortisol from exacerbating the blood sugar issues. So that's, again, where when we fix the insulin resistance, we will see that cortisol stabilize. So it's kind of, it's always a multifactorial approach. But with her, we have to sensitize ourselves to insulin, but also decrease the burden on the body, remove those sources of stress, whether they're hidden or emotional or biomechanical, so on and so forth. So again, we're really focusing on hormones, but it goes deeper than that. But then, yeah, looking at her thyroid function, her free T3, low, reverse T3, the highest I've ever seen. I've never seen anything over 30 before. But her reverse T3 was at 41. Gosh, that's hard. And then, elevated thyroid antibodies, very insulin resistant, 20.7, vitamin D was low, hemoglobin A1C was high, homocysteine high, methylation issues, C-reactive protein was high, very inflamed. Anyways, don't have time to get into all the nitty gritty. So I want to give you guys some, those were some different case studies that really illustrate what we're talking about today. So now I want to show you some, before and after success stories here. So we're before and after labs that, obviously are from some good success stories that I have. So this first one here, this client, overweight woman, trying to lose weight, all of that. But we can see on her first hormone test, her estrogen was on the lower side, progesterone was non-existent, amenorrhea, not having regular cycles, testosterone, very, very low. And believe me, she felt it, depression and anxiety and inability to lose weight and lack of motivation and so on and so forth. She was another individual with high production of cortisol. So the body is stressed out. It's perceiving a lot of stress, but low cortisol availability, probably because of blood sugar issues. And then anyways, so 3 months later, we redid that test and look at the difference. So we got her free cortisol from 72 to 109. We got her cortisol production from 448 4,480 down to 4,157. So we're reducing the burden on her body. Her body doesn't need to produce as much cortisol, but it is activating more of that cortisol as we stabilize blood sugar. Look at her testosterone, 4.4 to 10.4, literally on the border of below range and highly symptomatic to, almost to the point of getting on the high end of the range there at 10.4. Progesterone, her cycles came back as we got progesterone back into low end of the range. I'd like to get that higher, but either way, a very dramatic improvement. And this individual, no, this was not restrictively dieting and kicking her butt in personal training. We weren't doing personal training. She was doing some yoga on her own, good stress management, but a proper exercise stimuli, and then following her healing protocol. So really amazing improvements there. And then, when we start balancing all this stuff, all of a sudden she starts losing weight without having to really try. What do you know? When you improve metabolic function, your body does what you want it to. This is a success story that, is very active right now. Very compliant client. I really just can't say enough good things about her because it's just like everything I recommend she does, and does it well and does it diligently. She's kind of all over my Facebook page as a great success story, though. But she's a really pretty progressed case of Hashimoto's that we've been chipping away at for a while now, making some really good progress. So I just included her thyroid panels. We actually haven't even gotten to hormone testing yet, just because we've been very fixated on kind of gut health and thyroid health, and trying to get that as far as because budget. It's not like we can just run all the tests we want all the time, so we kind of have to break it into phases. But anyways, this was her first thyroid panel. TSH at 200. That should be a 200. Highest I've ever seen on TSH. T4 1, free T4.3, free T3 1.0. All of that really low, very hypothyroid. Reverse T3 wasn't bad though. But then look at her antibodies. They were over 1,000. I just put 1,000 because that's as high as the lab measured. It was over 1,000 for TPO, thyroid peroxidase antibody, and then TBG was at 46. So very wicked Hashimoto's, and yes, very symptomatic and matching up with that. So then 2 months later, 8 weeks later, after getting her started on her Hashimoto's protocol, we spot checked a few things. We looked at her free T4, free T3, and antibodies. Her thyroid hormone hadn't moved. It was basically the same, but the raging fire of autoimmunity going on in her body, we drastically put out the fire. Not completely, but a huge improvement from over 1,000 on the TPO antibody down to 319. And this was 8 weeks. And honestly, we started simple. You always want to start simple and then, increase the complexity as needed to get the desired effect. But her protocol was pretty basic, pretty simple, and it worked extremely well. However, it's like, okay, well, you're not really going to feel a lot better until we get the thyroid hormones up. So we made a few adjustments to her protocol, and then this was her most recent check-in. We're still chipping away at the antibodies, but we were able to triple her free T4 and double her free T3 in, it was about 7 or 8 weeks or so. But and big symptom reduction, feeling a lot better. So I mean, amazing success story. She's well on her way to really smashing that Hashimoto's and putting it into remission. So, and that was a very progressed case too. So I'm just very proud of her. All right, before and after labs 3 here. Trying to think who this is. So as we can see, though, the free T4 low, free T3 was normal, but the reverse T3 was pretty high there at 27.8. And then the antibodies just kind of on the border. So that's kind of a possible autoimmunity thing of like, well, they shouldn't be double digits like that, but it's not super progressed or anything. Insulin levels high, all of that. And then we see, this was, I want to say, about 45 days later, because really I got her started on more of a blood sugar protocol with some thyroid considerations. But look at this. We normalized free T4, free T3. We improved her free T3 a little bit, 3.4, 3.6. But then look at her reverse T3, 27.8 down to 18. Insulin, this was probably the biggest thing, and that was kind of the main thing we were targeting was look at her insulin levels, 20.6 down to 11.3 in about 45 days. And, of course, vitamin D, that, that's pretty easy to address. So pretty amazing what can happen when we work smarter, not just harder all the time. Okay, final example. This is a guy, a lot of women, because yes, women tend to be a little bit more susceptible to some of this stuff, but also, quite frankly, women are more interested in their health and they care more about their health. Um, it's not that guys are susceptible. They need to worry just as much. They just don't. I don't know why. But this is one of my guy clients. So, he initially came to me really with a lot of low testosterone type complaints, weight gain and inability to lose fat and, not feeling as motivated, libido, just a lot of classic low testosterone kind of symptoms. And yeah, sure enough, testosterone was on the low end, estrogen was on the high end. So this guy was estrogen dominant, a lot of inflammation, blood sugar issues, a lot of stress. He did have parasite in his gut. We did do a gut test, which I do with basically everybody. And yeah, a lot of dysfunction there. And then, his cortisol, he was kind of more in that acute phase. So that highly stressed out, his body heavily reacting to stress kind of phase. So a lot of high cortisol symptoms. I mean, look at that. Look how, he's the red line. This top black line is the high end of the reference range. He's way above that. Now, he does follow a normal pattern at least, but goodness gracious, this guy was in some serious fight or flight mode. So then, again, got him started on his protocol, and then 3 months later, we redid the hormone test. Look at these improvements. His estrogen is dropping a little bit in the right direction, still higher than where I want it, but gosh, some huge improvements, 23.1 down 21.1. But then look at his testosterone from the low end of the reference range to bam, kind of smack dab in the middle, which is for the most part where we want it, or maybe a little bit higher. Huge improvements. And the symptom improvement was huge. I mean, this is the data, but what gets really exciting is when that person is sitting across from you going, oh my gosh, I feel better than I have in years. Like, what did you do? And, how can we keep that going? It's such an amazing, fulfilling line of work. I just absolutely in love with what I do and helping people this way, providing them with answers nobody else has. And it's not even that hard. I mean, it's complex science, but it's not, you don't have to kick your own butt in the gym or starve yourself or hate yourself enough to kick your own butt. No, this is just giving your body what it needs to work properly. That's all it is. It's complex, but, it's very cool. And then look at his cortisol. Now, yeah, they zoomed out on the graph. You can see like over here on the left side, it shows, scoot over, you can see the 500 over here versus on the other side, they compressed the graph for, 200 over here. But anyways, his cortisol, huge improvements, 445 on free cortisol down to 202. We cut his cortisol in half. It was way too high. So now he actually has a healthy amount of cortisol production, healthy amount of availability, still a little bit heightened, but man, drastic improvements. And he was feeling so much better, earning the quality of life and health he deserves. So just really amazing work. Alrighty. So I mentioned this earlier, but yes, we really focused mostly on the HPA and HPT axis today. So, like I said before, clients, trainees that I mentor, fellow practitioners that I do clinical advising with, I remind them of this all the time. But guys, it's not just measure hormones and fix hormones. It's not the point. We have to ask the deeper question of why are the hormones doing this? And what can we investigate to uncover those hidden stressors, and what ways can we reduce the burden on the body? And then, yes, there are those specific considerations of how we can modulate the hormone pathways and, rebalance the hormones, but it's more the underlying cause of what provoked the hormone imbalance of the first place. So the way that I train professionals and practitioners to think about this stuff is to think about these axes, the HPA, HPT, etc. Think about it like your check engine light on the car. If the check engine light comes on, you don't just take it to the auto shop and say, hey, can you turn this light off? Like, that's not supposed to be on. No, you have them lift up the hood, dig in the engine, find what's wrong with the engine, and fix that. And then the light should detect, like, oh, well, the underlying cause is fixed. I can turn off now, right? You don't just manually turn the check engine light off. No, it's signaling that there's something deeper that is dysfunctional. So that's kind of the way that I look at and I teach others to think about these axes is you have to think about what is causing it. So again, that's where the other testing of, gut function and pathogens and viruses and heavy metals and all these other underlying kind of contributors, so it's not just fixing the hormones. And that's the other thing is a lot of people, there's so many HRT, there's a lot of buzz these days about hormone balance. It's something people are becoming more cognizant of, but they're getting overly fixated on hormones. And gosh darn it, that's not the way to do it. And a lot of people are just jumping to HRT. There's so many HRT clinics popping up, and they're just more than willing to pump you full of hormones, but it's not fixing the problem. They're not addressing the underlying cause of why do you have the hormone balance. They're just, well, let's just pump you full of hormones and then you'll feel better, assuming they get the dosing right and assuming your body can actually metabolize it and utilize it properly, which probably can't. So really, in my opinion, the only people that should be on HRT are those that are either andropausal or menopausal, and even then it's questionable if you really need it. But if you are in that 50 plus stage of life and you just can't produce the same levels of your youthful hormones, you might feel better with a little boost. Or if you are more of a medical scenario where you have a tumor on your pituitary gland, or if you've had a hysterectomy or something like that, if you've had endocrine tissue removed, or if you have something that's interfering with the endocrine tissue's function, okay, then you might be a good candidate for HRT. But if you're an otherwise healthy individual, there's no reason you should need HRT. There's no reason. It means your body's dysfunctional and you need to figure out why, you need to address the underlying cause. Otherwise, you're literally just brushing the dirt under the rug. So that drives me crazy. So, examples of HRT gone wrong. These are real clients, real people that were on HRT. They started working with me, and I did my testing, and they had a lot of nasty symptoms. So this first one, 50-something-year-old lady, so she was menopausal, and I knew she was on HRT. I didn't know exactly what, and of course I got that information from her because when I got her test results, my God, her estrogen was through the roof. And guys, this is serious stuff. It's not just like, oh, estrogen's too high, so you're going to have high estrogen symptoms. No, this is increasing your risk of hormone-sensitive cancer. This is not to be taken lightly. It's not funny. It's not to be, it's not light stuff. This is a big deal. So, her total estrogen through the roof, no progesterone to balance it out, and then testosterone through the roof. And yes, the symptoms fit. She was kind of a hormonal mess. And then her adrenal function was god awful, just like flatlined, high production, low availability, insulin resistant, I see the same stuff over and over and over. It's the standard American lifestyle poisoning everybody. But so I asked her about her HRT and her provider, and I was like, does your provider, do testing to monitor your levels at all? No, can't remember last time they ever tested. It's really just, I show up and they give me the same, they ask me how I feel and they just pump me full of the same doses last time. So she was doing, I came to find out, she was doing estradiol and testosterone shots every 2 weeks. And she described it. I'm not describing it. She described it as a cattle line. Basically, you show up, next, you get pumped full of your hormone, on for the day. That's a disservice and malpractice, if I've ever seen it. And fortunately, I have a very wonderful resource. My best friend's father is a holistic compounding pharmacist, and so I have a great resource to refer people to if they need to switch HRT providers, and I have a great working relationship with them, so that's pretty cool. And then this one over here, let me think who this is. Oh, okay, yeah, I know who this was. Yeah, so kind of the same idea. Estrogen was way too high, testosterone was way too high. This was actually a guy client who was taking testosterone that was inappropriately dosed and not some other considerations. And then, of course, his body wasn't healthy enough to utilize the hormone properly. Now, I will say I was surprised that his estrogen wasn't higher, considering how high his testosterone was, because it was 255, 115 is top of the reference range. Whereas estrogen was kind of, I don't, he might have been doing something else, but either way. Now, this is just the summary page. It was a lot worse than this that you can see on pages like 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. But yeah, HRT gone wrong. And then a final example here. This individual, who was this? Oh, yeah. Okay, so this was another lady client. She had a lot of stuff going on: thyroid, adrenal, sex hormone issues. But again, just estrogen through the roof, testosterone very high, progesterone non-existent, wasn't cycling. You need progesterone, balance estrogen. Like, same idea. So these are just 3 examples of HRT gone wrong, not being monitored properly. So that's the thing. If you just pump hormone exogenously into a dysfunctional metabolism, what do you think is going to happen? So the way to think about hormones, guys, you have production and clearance. So synthesis and metabolism. So the way I like to describe it is almost like a sink, right? Where you have the faucet that controls how much water is flowing into the sink, and then the drain that controls how much water is draining through the sink. So for healthy hormones, you have to have adequate production and proper metabolism. So you have to have the sink turned on just right, but you also have to have it draining at an appropriate rate. So think about it. If you don't have enough water flowing in and the drain is wide open, you have a bone dry sink. Or if you have the drain completely stopped up and the water pouring in on full blast, you're going to have an overflowing sink. You have to have balance. So with HRT, essentially the prescriber, provider person, they're in control of the faucet. But then it's going to be other factors that we have control of that control the drain in the metabolism. Anyways, a lot to all that. So a lot of information, long presentation. But really the question is your current approach addressing your unique metabolic needs? Nutrition that's customized to your unique metabolism, workouts catered to your metabolic needs, functional healing protocols to resolve the underlying dysfunction preventing you from reaching your goals. And then, of course, working on the relationship with your food, your lifestyle, your exercise, with yourself, behavior modification-based coaching. So, I really take that more holistic, thorough approach. I'm kind of almost overly thorough sometimes. Anyways, who's this program for? Those are ready. I'm not necessarily trying to go on to blabber about the different programs, but you guys know where to find me. If you guys need help with the stuff, which if you're an American and you're trying to lose weight, I guarantee you probably need a little help. Anyways, so again, I'm Brendan Vermeyer. I'm the owner and founder of Metabolic Solutions, but I do offer complimentary 20-minute virtual consults. I do about 90% of my work remotely. So I do screen sharing and phone call or Skype call or whatever. It works extremely well. It's amazing. I have clients all over the US, and actually I train professionals all over the world on how to do this type of work. But I do offer those 20-minute phone consults, and that's kind of brief. That's basically, what are you interested in? What are you looking for? Here's how I work in a nutshell. Yes, or is that a good fit for you or not? And I'll be honest with you. I mean, if you have something very particular that I don't do, then I'll let you know that. But I'll just trying to gauge if it's a good fit for you. And then I do also offer more in-depth hour-long consults for $50. Now, that's to really dig deep into your case. I do have you fill out questionnaires ahead of time, so I know what I'm dealing with and what I'm looking at, and I make concise recommendations on basically here's how I would recommend we proceed and get you started. And then if you continue on, I apply that $50 towards your initial lab test interpretation session. And then, of course, if you don't continue, obviously, I get paid for my time because I'm a busy guy. Email info@metabolicsolutionsllc.com if you're interested and you want to optimize metabolic function and dig into all this stuff. So long presentation. I really do appreciate if you guys listen to the whole thing. I know I went pretty deep with it, and quite frankly, there's a lot more to it, but I think this serves as a good overview of a lot of very important things to understand. So, either way, give me a shout. I really appreciate your time, and I'll look forward to talking to you guys soon. Thanks so much.